I could literally say like the secret to life right now, and it wouldn't get any traction because of this. It'd be like, wait, we can't listen to an insane person.
I don't know. It might get more traction. You never know. I do want to take this moment as Lars takes off his beautiful, beautiful hat to say if anyone else in the comment section or watching right now has had a realization this month or has learned something valuable that they want to apply to their ongoing daily life, please leave us a comment in the comment section. We do love to hear from you all. Become a part of our podcast.
Tell us your realizations. What have you realized? Which, should we look up the actual definition of realize? Because doesn't that actually mean, like, we take it as an idea, but doesn't realize mean you take something that is an idea and turn it to something that is real?
Become fully aware of something as a fact, understand clearly was number one. Okay. Number two is cause something desired or anticipated to happen.
All right. Okay. Got it. I got the answer here. Thank you. Can you use it in a sentence?
I realized that this podcast is amazing.
Podcast guest who never understands the question. And he's like, that's a great question. Could you explain what that means and what the question is again? Realizations. I think for me, this is a continuation of a realization over the last year and a half. But I think the biggest realization, if there's an overarching one for me, is continued learning and continued growth being a key to life's quote unquote success and or happiness, whatever you define that as. I think learning and improving and growing, both from a practical sense of you get better and learn new skills and learn new tools that then you can implement and improve your life and improve the others around you by sort of learning from the knowledge of people who've gone before or people who are experts in whatever field you're entering, but also for the self-actualization and just the good feelings that it comes from. Like, it's partly for the practical knowledge, but the other half of it is you just feel better about yourself and you feel happier when you're learning something. And even if it's just something that you're doing on the side, like, oh, I'm going to learn how to knit, or I want to learn how this silly game works. But I think just, and going deep dive with stuff, don't surface, like, don't just dabble a little bit, like get obsessed with something. Even if that deep dive just means like for a couple weeks, you watch whatever you need to watch or read books or whatever, but just go through a deep dive. And so for me, that it ties back to being back in school in an acting conservatory right now. So I'm going deeper into film history, into theater history, into Shakespeare, into movement, into voice, into scene study than I ever have in my life. So if A, that feels good, but B, I know, like going to the gym, I know that just from the sheer time I put into it over the next 8 months, I'm putting in the time and effort. So the results are guaranteed, just as they would be if you were to decide, okay, I'm going to do 100 push-ups every day. Like that you stack those on and there's a direct result to that. And the biggest one of those for me that's really fun is Shakespeare. Just rediscovering and realizing the fucking brilliance of Shakespeare and how it's such a common thing. It's kind of like Shakespeare kind of reminds me, people's attitude about Shakespeare reminds me of their attitude to country music sometimes. Because you'll ask someone, you'll like, what kind of music do you like? And they'll say like, pretty much everything except country and maybe one more. And a lot of the times you'll ask actors about their favorite things or favorite things to do. And a lot of people will be like, yeah, except for Shakespeare, or they hear of Shakespeare and it's like, oh yeah, Shakespeare's nice, but that's just an old thing that people used to do. And it's like something they make you do in school, but it's all the best writing. It's all the best life universals. It's all the best emotion. It's certainly the best writing. I don't think anyone, like, nobody's as layered and as nuanced and as it's perfect. When you read it, it's crazy. So it's just something, it's really been fun for me to go deep dive into that. And the biggest thing of that is I'm learning Henry V's St. Crispian Day speech, which is the king's speech on the eve of a battle that by the numbers they're going to get slaughtered, and he has to rouse his men and his brothers. It's the original Band of Brothers speech, which to me is the speech. I mean, that doesn't get more epic than a king to his army, but that's also the locker room speech. That's also the lawyer speech. That's also the politician speech. So it's just the idea of, if you can do Shakespeare and do it well and master that language, there's literally nothing that you can't do after that in TV and film. And everything after that in TV and film becomes easier because you've spent the time and energy on Shakespeare. So that's my Shakespeare rant. What about you? That's my big realization.
My big realization came during the Tom Todoroff Saturday workshop, which you can take for free if you go to laughingvikings.com/links. Or is it join? It's links, right?
It's /actors. It'll be /actors. laughingvikings.com/actors.
That's it. I thought of stillness as just a moment-to-moment thing, that you would use stillness to emphasize or have a moment so that you were completely still, and that way it had more emphasis to it or had more power to it. But I was wrong. The moment is the scene. Stillness happens throughout. And I think that's so important for today, because we're so used to just moving around willy-nilly. And even right now, like I'm moving around, my knees shake all the time, so I'm always constantly moving. But to make sure that you are just still, and make sure you're just present, and just make sure that you're there, and that you don't need to do anything other than just be present. And that's it. It was such a freeing thing to learn. And it's such a freeing thing to have happen, because, like, again, I thought it was supposed to be an emphasis thing, but it's not. And the more we watch, because Lars was watching Buster Keaton and a lot of silent films last week for his second week of the conservatory. And so because I was around, I was watching a lot of those films with him. You can see how precise they were with their movements for those durations of time. Like, because they were only emphasizing with their body, and they would have like cue cards or whatever for those lines. Like, they weren't delivering lines. They're not just like willy-nilly, like just moving around. They have to be so specific at every move that they make. And it comes back to what Tom always says to us: justify every move that you make, justify every word that you speak. And I really am holding on to that. And something that I want to work on for next month is understanding more how to find danger in your work, which comes back to one of the guideposts that we learned, guidepost 13, mischief. Finding the danger in your work. And I'm still sort of struggling to grasp that concept, because some scenes don't really demand it as well. But in the case of Henry V, it demands so much of you, because you're about to go on to battle. It's the day before. This is so important. Yeah. It's the most epic thing that you could ever be in. Like, the importance is through the roof, the life and death, the conflict is through the roof, the relationship is your entire country and all your brethren and everyone in your family. Yeah, and it's reiterating for the men that are about to go to battle with you that you're my brother. No matter what, we have this bond that no one can take away from us. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the speeches, is that it's about establishing that connection. And even when it's a soliloquy that you're only like, you're talking to the audience, you're still establishing a connection with them. You're still making sure that there's a relationship there between you and the audience. And you always have to constantly be listening to them. Like, right. Because like, they'll dictate how you should be saying something, or how you can deliver something differently to make sure that it lands for them. And getting back to your point and realization of stillness, that's extra important in TV and film. Obviously, in that case, in silent film, it's the way you tell the story. So, and that's it's actually a good rule of thumb, or a good exercise. Watch your scenes, or watch your own audition scenes with no volume. And if you can't figure out the story, and you can't figure out the arc and see some of those moments, then you're probably not telling the story, because
on camera, it's like, obviously it's the words, but it's other things in the words. And you mentioned justify every action. Shakespeare's advice to Hamlet, advice to the players, or sorry, Hamlet's advice to the players. Shakespeare's words, a lot of people, and Tom taught this to us, that that's an actor can look at that as Shakespeare saying, this is how to be an actor. This is how to play my pieces, which then translates to how to play anything. And a big part of that is suit the words to the action and the action to the word, and don't do any more, don't do any less. Yeah, those silent films, man, everyone is so specific. And if it's a look, it's just one specific look in the exact direction on where it needs to be. And a lot of the times they shot in masters too. So maybe the physicality was a little exaggerated, but it was so specific. And you could tell. I watched foreign films without captions, and I get the gist. I could be like, okay, this is what's going on here. I think this way she's mad at him, and this is she. Then like you can piece it together, but not if they weren't specific. If it was just kind of talking with hands and just kind of doing this and shrugging and kind of bouncing around a little bit while you're talking and doing this, then you're just like, I don't know who that guy is. So.
And to put it on a different spectrum, I had a session this week with a French-speaking woman that was doing a voiceover in French. I don't speak a word of French, nor do I know a lot of French. But when I know that I'm laughing throughout her doing her PSA or whatever it was she was working on, when I was laughing at it, I knew that it was genuinely good because I didn't understand anything, and B, could feel the intention that was going on. If you can feel that intention and you know that it's there and you know that the beats are strong, it'll still be good no matter what you do.
Right.
And like, we don't lose the fact that it needs to be fun for you. It needs to have that gravitas where it's like, oh my God, I'm so excited to say these words.
And a major thing about comedy is also surprise too. Yeah. So it's any vocal variation that you weren't expecting. It's a change in volume. It's a change in pace. So like literally any vocal variation can end up being funny just because it's surprising if it's a quick enough turn.
Yeah, and something that you said about a voiceover teacher that you had saying to change up the rate or the inflection on the second line so that it doesn't stay stagnant. I think that really resonated with me this month because it's so interesting. And I sort of was testing it out with another person that came in for an audition just to see how it worked. And it did. It really punched up their scene because they bought into it.
Yeah, she always makes sure that somewhere in the first two sentences there's a rate change, either, and it could just be one word, or it could be the first sentence is said really fast, and then the second sentence is said really slow. Like just those variances, especially in an audition, because that'll be enough of a pattern interrupt if everyone's been saying it at the same pace that it'll just pop to them. It'll pop out. But then it's also specifics of, if it's a commercial, for example, finding what words sort of needed to be lifted up and highlighted or emphasized or stretched out or really put up on a silver platter so that they do stand out. But a big part of that is just changing the rate. Yeah.
And like, it's so many little simple things that you can just do to tweak up and enhance what you're already doing. Like, you don't need to change everything right away. It's just those little tweaks and those little things that you keep peppering into your scripts and keep peppering into the sides that you're working on, or the monologue or the scene. And the more you do that, then the more you focus on these little tiny details, the better you're going to become.
Right. One thing I'll share too, because I know that you talk about it a lot when you're helping people with sessions, and we do as well, because it came up in class today. Was what Tom will call architecture. And it's just the idea that no matter whether you're looking at a scene or a song or a full story, really, let's just call it storytelling, it can't begin and end in the same place.
No.
And actors you can't know the end of the scene. So if you're delivering the prologue to Romeo and Juliet all depressed and dark and sinister because you know the two of them end up dead at the end, then you're sort of missing the point. But it's just the idea that every audition, every scene, every speech, every song, every story, there is a physics to storytelling. So if you know that the end is a crescendo, like say in my battle speech, for example, usually if you picture any epic, like say the Braveheart speech, it usually ends with everyone screaming and yelling and one final charge.
Yeah.
So if it ends there, if you come out the gate yelling, I mean, maybe you can pull it off, but it's not as good a story as starting simply and starting calmly, or maybe it's kind of upbeat. Maybe there's some humor because you're chatting with your best mates and your best buddies, even though you're about to go to your deaths potentially. There's still humor in that relationship. So just the idea, and the point that he made is, if you are not considering architecture or storytelling, you're not a storyteller, which means you're not doing the primary purpose of the job. So it's the idea of, like, there's a lot of things that need to go into a good scene, but one of them needs to be architecture, AKA storytelling. So just that was a realization to me. Like, you can put everything else into it, but if it starts the same place and finishes the same place, it's not going to affect people compared to someone else who then does it properly, and you start in one place and you finish in a completely different place.